It is a potentially huge development in a war for freedom that has captured the imagination of the world. On his first visit to Western Europe since the war began, President Zelensky arrived in London to a rapturous reception and straight away renewed his request for fighter jets.
I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words. Combat aircrafts for Ukraine. Wings for freedom.
And this time it sounded as if we might be about to say yes.
When it comes to the provision of military assistance to Ukraine, nothing is off the table.
The big question, of course, is if so, then when and how many of which aircraft? Carl will try to assess for us tonight what this all means. Also on News at 10. The images remain apocalyptic and more than 10,000 are dead, but there are still miracles. Delete the evidence. Julie has frankly astonishing claims of rampant misogyny in the police and attempts by senior officers to cover their tracks.
Some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority.
Despite the jeers of his opponents, Joe Biden gives his strongest hint yet that he will indeed run again. Visceral first-hand evidence that the hunts very much appear to go on. And from world triathlon champion to Oscar frontrunner with an interlude waiting tables at the Academy Awards themselves. The true story of the screenwriter behind All Quiet on the Western Front.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The remarkable President Zelensky, actor turned wartime leader, delivered such a powerful appeal for Western warplanes in our Houses of Parliament this lunchtime that it made it very hard for the Prime Minister to say no. And in a startling departure from all recent statements, he didn't. But he didn't quite say yes either. President Zelensky's Wings for Freedom speech, as it will perhaps be remembered, was lyrical and rhetorical. And yes, understandably theatrical too, as he asked for more help repelling the Russian invasion. Jumping the gun slightly, he said he would be leaving Parliament thanking MPs in advance for powerful English planes. Rishi Sunak may not quite be at that point yet, but he didn't rule out sending some in the future. Number 10 said the government was exploring what jets Britain may be able to give. We have, though, already agreed to train Ukrainian pilots here, of course.
As President Zelensky arrived in Paris tonight, his tour of Western Europe appeared to be bearing fruit. He was brought from the UK on the British government plane. And everywhere he goes, there is fanfare and gratitude.
No, be careful.
But there is only one real purpose for his visits to 3 capitals in 2 days. It was earlier in London where there seemed to be a breakthrough. A cosy embrace from his host on the tarmac at Stansted. But wearing wartime green, the Ukrainian president, just off the steps of an RAF aircraft, was here to ask for British fighter jets. At a packed joint session of Parliament at Westminster Hall, he described why London had been his first stop.
London has stood with Kiev since day one. We think the same way as you do. We know freedom will win. We know Russia will lose.
But then to business, with a not-so-subtle hint presenting to the Speaker a helmet worn by one of Ukraine's top fighter pilots.
The writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it."
At Buckingham Palace, an audience with the King, the first ever for the Ukrainian president.
Well, we've all been worried about you and thinking about your country for so long. I can't tell you.
Rishi Sunak announced some training of Ukrainian pilots today. But when their leaders' requests for Western fighter jets are rejected, they remember what was said when they first asked for Western tanks.
Our soldiers.
Very good.
In Dorset, Zelensky came to see his tank crews being trained on 14 Challenger 2s ahead of their delivery to the battlefield. And this evening, at a joint news conference, the clearest sign yet that Britain's one-time resistance to the idea is softening.
Can you offer absolute clarity here and now? Will they get them? And if so, when?
When it comes to the provision of military assistance to Ukraine, nothing is off the table. And that's because we're determined to ensure that Vladimir, the president, and his people can be victorious.
Before travelling to France, President Zelensky presented Ukrainian soldiers with medals. But he might have gained more from this trip than these newly decorated troops. Because his hope is that once one of his allies agrees to his latest request, others will follow. And with a massive Russian offensive expected within weeks, time may be running out. Rohit Khatru, News at 10, Dorset.
Since the Russian invasion began, Ukraine's Western allies have eventually responded to requests for military hardware, as Rohit was saying, with the UK at the forefront. First missiles, recently tanks. But what about President Zelensky's latest appeal for fighter jets? Well, currently Ukraine's Air Force use the Soviet-era Su-27s and MiG-29s, both of which are 30 years out of date. At the start of the war, Poland had offered to send more MiGs to Ukraine via a US airbase in Germany. That deal broke down following US concerns. But Ukraine is now asking for more modern fighter jets, namely, or at least particularly, the F-16. Now, while the US has ruled out sending that aircraft to Ukraine, Rishi Sunak's spokesman has said that the government is exploring what jets the UK may be able to give over the coming years. Well, those could be either the F-35 or, much more likely, the Typhoon. And Carl is here to talk about all this. I mean, I guess, Rohit was asking the essential questions there, but let's just start, to what could we give and will we? So let's just start with what could we give realistically?
Well, I don't see F-35s going to Ukraine anytime soon. They are very high-tech, the latest stealth fighters. We've only got about 30 of them. The US would have to allow them to go, and as someone in Downing Street told me, there's nothing Vladimir Putin would like more than to shoot down one of those and open it up and see what sort of tech is inside it. So I don't really see that as an option at the moment. Typhoons are a different story. Britain has more than 100 of them. A couple of dozen are due to be retired during this decade. The training is a bit more complicated. The RAF has its own backlog for jet training. And also they are built along with Germany, Spain and Italy, who would also have to approve their export. So it is complicated, but a bit like the Challenger tanks were used to try and unlock the Leopard tanks from Germany and other European nations, you could see a world in which the Typhoon is offered as a way to unlock F-16s, which is what the Ukrainians really want. There are thousands of them all over the world, although, again, the Americans would have to approve their export. OK, if that's what could be exported, what's the politics? Big hint today, but no certainty. Will we do it? Well, the politics is changing really, really quickly. It's only a week ago Downing Street said, we don't believe it would be practical to send those jets to Ukraine. Today, the Defence Secretary has been asked to see what jets can be sent. So I get the feeling Downing Street, between the lines, is a little bit more enthusiastic about this than the Ministry of Defence. But both are saying, in any event, this is very much a long-term project for building capability. In other words, it's not necessarily, at least from Britain's point of view, about sending something to fight in this war anytime soon.
OK, Carl, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the latest on Monday's earthquakes now. And another president, Turkey's President Erdogan, has angry questions to answer about the speed of the response of the authorities there, as we'll hear shortly. The number of confirmed dead in the southeast of his country and in northern Syria is just short of a staggering 12,000, a truly terrible and constantly rising total. In the Turkish city of Antakya, known in ancient times as Antioch, one of the crucibles of Christianity, the destruction is biblical.
A fortress city cast to ruins by nature. Antakya's Roman walls were designed to protect, but offered none when the assault came from the ground beneath. This was not the epicentre of the quake, but it is the epicentre of its destruction. What's left is a broken city of broken people. The official death toll here is 1,000, but 1,000 people lived in these apartments. 100 have now been found, and very few of them were alive. Suna's daughter and grandchildren are amongst the missing. A 2-year-old and a 6-year-old beneath all of this. She told me she could no longer cry, but just prayed for a miracle. Ahmed's grandchildren are also missing. You don't really need to know his language to grasp his fury at the lack of any significant search operation.
Thank you.
Those searching are working with anything they can find, even washing up bowls and saucepans from the rubble. Incredibly, they are still finding survivors. 10-year-old Tuna pulled free after 60 hours. The smile on his rescuer's face speaks of the rare beauty of the moment. Wearing just his pyjamas and the helmet, gloves and big boots of one of those who saved him, he's carried to safety.
Yes, indeed.
He appears to only have a cut and some bruising, though it's hard to imagine the trauma he's endured.
He was awake, so pretty stable at the first sight, so we need a full body check, and we found that he was a bit hypothermic, but no other injury we found. A small wounds on his leg, but the airway, breathing and circulation was absolutely stable.
The chance of such rescues diminishes with every hour. It's impossible to know how many are lost beneath their homes, but the streets are lined with families who know which of their relatives are missing.
Well, I would say it's definitely a desperate situation, given the fact that there is a lack of help from the government so far, especially in this area.
Wherever you walk in this city, there is destruction and desperate people. Desperate because of what's happened and desperate because of what is not happening. They know that lives are ebbing away in this rubble and the help is just not coming at the speed that's needed. And so on the streets, the piles of covered bodies build. In local legend, Antakya is a place of miracles. It doesn't feel like that now. It feels like a place where hope is dying and help is desperately needed. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Antakya.
Well, it is uplifting and miraculous to see those survivors, but with nearly 12,000 dead, the earthquake is now the world's deadliest for a decade. According to the World Health Organization, 23 million people are likely to have been affected by the earthquake. Of that figure, 1.4 million are children. Countries around the world have begun announcing financial aid for the region today. The UK announced 8 million in life-saving support. The European Union has confirmed it will send almost 6 million of support to the region. And the US has sent 2 search and rescue teams of around 80 people each. They arrived in Turkey today. So if getting government help to the worst affected places in Turkey is hit and miss, in the war-torn parts of northern Syria, rebel-held areas are having to fend for themselves. The only consolation is that they are used to that. The skills built up by the White Helmet rescue teams during nearly 12 years of bombardment in the country's civil war are being tested by a different enemy, the destructive power of nature.
It's scarcely believable, but there can be moments of deep joy amidst the devastation. Like when a little boy is found apparently unscathed, and he can even laugh and joke with his rescuers. These scenes will become rarer in the coming hours, but for now there is still hope. Thousands of earthquake survivors in Syria have already cheated death in the country's 12-year-long civil war. The youngest maybe aren't old enough to remember the bombs which have already destroyed much of their country, but the expertise the white helmet civil defence volunteers have acquired, freeing people from crumpled buildings in rebel-held areas, may save lives this week. Sometimes the spaces they're working in are so cramped that the rescuers have to be pulled out by their colleagues. Then comes the girl they freed. They look for the smallest signs of life, a movement in the rubble, and they go to work with the limited tools they have. They reassure the boy he'll soon be free, and they keep their promise. With basic medical care, and that's the only kind available in this neglected part of the world, this boy will live. But help comes too late for most. Whole families have been killed. Inside this room, covered by blankets, are 25 bodies. They're all relatives of Ahmad Idris.
We find the war. Look at the injustice that follows us. We came here to find safe shelter for us and our children. But at the end, look how fate has caught up with us. Glory be to God.
International sanctions will hamper aid getting through to parts of the country which will badly need help. The Syrian government has few friends, though Russian forces which helped it crush Aleppo are still here. They are extracting the living and dead from the rubble that on this occasion wasn't the result of their bombs. Despite everything that this country has been through in the past decade, its people still tried to make the most of happy times. But what can you do when your world comes crashing down? Ian Woods, News at 10.
Well, Peter is in the city of Adana in southern Turkey. Peter, amazing scenes today still of people being rescued, but we know it's extremely cold with you, and for the survivors, aid is the crucial thing. You've moved in, or you've gone in with a British aid team today.
That's right, Tom. We travelled overnight last night, through the night, to try to get to Turkey in the first place with the SAR Aid UK search and rescue team. Even getting from Istanbul to the affected part of Turkey was a challenge, though. Snowstorms have hit much of Turkey. The weather has been very cruel. Nature's been very cruel to the people here who are suffering. But the aid is now getting in, and it's just a question of how to get it to areas like behind me where it is most needed. We've been watching this operation. They'll be going through the night. They keep stopping silent. They think they hear someone in there, and that's why we'll be keeping on top of that. But while there is hope that the aid's coming in, there was also criticism of Turkey's President Erdogan. He visited some of the most affected areas, some of the harshest affected areas in Hayat, a place where 3,500 people have been killed in the earthquake. He admitted there have been shortcomings, but he was hitting back at his critics, saying that the troublemakers are trying to criticise his government's slow response. But the reality is that there are thousands of people, on top of the almost 11,000 dead, thousands more that are still sleeping in tents on snowy mountainsides. They've lost everything, and they are critical of their government's slow response. They're seeing the international aid getting to the place it needs to be before the Turkish response. But I think that it's interesting as well that Erdogan is very well aware of the dissent, and tonight we've had the Turkish government cracking down on Twitter, imposing a Twitter ban to try and quell some of that dissent, but also moving away from the politics of this, again reminding the aid agencies that are coming here. I watch these people wave their children goodbye. They don't know how long they'll be here. They don't know the danger they'll face. We've seen the worst of nature. Now we are seeing the best of humanity.
OK, Peter, thank you very much indeed. Now back here, the jailing yesterday of police serial rapist David Carrick is all too sadly the latest example of a clear and obvious crisis of sexual offenders and misogynists working in plain sight inside the UK's biggest police force. It is not, though, confined to London's Metropolitan Police, as Julie has been finding out for a documentary which will go out here on ITV tomorrow night. Former and serving female officers have told her about sexual assaults and about cover-ups, including claims of being told to delete potentially incriminating evidence.
This week's sentencing of David Carrick and other recent high-profile cases have prompted widespread revulsion among the public. But they've also led many women officers from not just the Met, but across the whole of UK policing to lift the lid on a culture rotten with misogyny and tolerant of abuse. A young woman we're calling Rachel joined the Met on its graduate training scheme in 2020. She's recently left in despair. Whilst working in the Serious Sexual Offences Unit, she was horrified at what her colleagues dismissed as banter.
It was on the day that it was said that Wayne Couzens bought petrol to burn Sarah Everard's body, but it was also the week where there was a petrol shortage, and someone in my team said in a very joking manner, it's a good thing he didn't try and buy the petrol now to burn her body, because he wouldn't have been able to.
But what was the atmosphere in the room?
It was only really me. I said, you cannot say that, it's not funny. I took it to my sergeant. I mean, he did speak to that officer, but it was quite casual.
Rachel also claims another officer in the unit had the same nickname as Wayne Couzens had, the rapist. And in the wake of the Charing Cross scandal, in which it was found some officers had been sending each other highly sexualised and violent messages, another shocking story.
Everyone in the Met had to watch this presentation. A superintendent took it and said, this has just come out about Charing Cross. So can everyone go and have a look at their Facebook and their WhatsApps and just delete everything that you think could be reported?
This was a senior police officer telling serving officers to go and delete whatever they got on their phones.
Yeah, it was sort of, this is the official line that I have to read to you, but I'm telling you now, go home tonight and get rid of all the evidence.
The Met Police did not respond to this specific allegation. Elsewhere in the UK, story after story of misogyny and allegations of sexual offending.
Hi, Julie. Nice to meet you.
Really good to see you. Faye is still a serving officer for West Mercia Police. She alleges she was sexually assaulted at a police party by a senior officer. When she complained, he received a written warning, but the police and CPS believed it didn't amount to criminal behaviour.
In mitigation, it was identified that he was a strong performer at work. Just felt that don't worry about sexually assaulting or sexually harassing your colleagues because you're really good at your job. You're far too valuable to the police service to get rid of you. You can do what you like.
It's a theme echoed time and again by the women who speak to us. Baroness Louise Casey is leading the formal review into the culture of the Met, and she's about to publish her full report. How big a crisis point is this for policing, do you think?
I don't know how much worse it could be.
All the forces we spoke to told us they condemn any abusive behaviour and promise systemic reform. The Home Office has asked every force in England and Wales to check their officers and staff against the police database. But while we have a police force where offenders can hide in plain sight, knowing they can act with impunity, trust in the police is in the gravest peril. Julie Etchingham, News at 10.
Well, that is shocking and clearly required viewing. And Julie's exposure programme, Women and the Police, The Inside Story. Clearly lots of brave women speaking out, and it goes out tomorrow evening here on ITV1 after the news. And Julie has written about their findings in a blog on our website, so please do go and have a read. Now, 2 years into his presidency, and Joe Biden has got a decision to make. Does he start preparing to run again for election? The answer from his midpoint State of the Union address overnight appears to be that yes, indeed. He will. Not too surprisingly, he trumpeted his achievements at the halfway stage. He also drew clear dividing lines between his agenda and that of the Republican Party, and he drew much shouted criticism from some of his fiercest opponents. And yet he spoke of working together.
He might not have officially announced he's running, but today in Wisconsin he gave the impression he was, jogging onto stage to hammer home his message of a recovering economy and this bipartisan offer to the Republicans.
We can actually work together. We actually work together.
The President of the United States.
It was one of the leitmotifs of last night's State of the Union address to Congress. Take this quip to the new Republican Speaker.
Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. Let me give you...
But there was a vocal minority who made their abhorrence of the president clear.
Well, I'm glad
but he gave as good as he got.
Contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal.
And back on script, he returned to one phrase a dozen times.
Let's finish the job this time. Let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. We got to finish the job. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform.
But it was when advocating for gun reform that he really shifted gear. Forget Sleepy Joe. This was Angry Joe.
Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all.
The divisions across Congress were visibly clear, reflecting those of the country. But President Biden sought to occupy the moderate centre as he rounded on the insurrectionists of January 6th during a final rhetorical flourish.
Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue.
Here's the real State of the Union.
The response from the only candidate to so far have declared was withering.
Biden and the radical Democrats have wasted trillions of dollars and caused the worst inflation in half a century.
But President Biden's performance is being hailed by some in Washington as one of his best.
Mr. President, that was awesome!
Thank you.
That was awesome!
Perhaps persuading doubters in his own party
well, we can do this.
He might just have what it takes to win again.
Well, Dan, you said it yourself there. There was a lot of let's finish the job. Do we see this as the unofficial beginning of a campaign for President Biden's re-election?
Well, look, he hasn't pressed the button to launch his campaign, but his finger seems to be hovering very close to it indeed. Certainly in terms of his supporters will cite his performance last night as somewhat of a game changer. But look, it's not going to be plain sailing. There was a recent poll by ABC and the Washington Post that found that 62% of people found that he'd either accomplished not very much or little to nothing. So perhaps they're waiting to see what happens with the economy, some more good statistics before they do officially announce. And then, of course, there is his age. He is 80 at the moment. He's the oldest serving president in US history. When the election rolls around in November 2024, he'll be turning 82 and 86 by the end of his second term if he wins it. Some are doubting whether he has the stamina to continue performing at the very highest level, but his supporters will say, look what happened last night. He had the fire in his soul and in his heart to really take on any Republican candidates such as Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis.
OK, Dan, thanks very much. To be continued for the whole of the next 2 years. Thank you very much. Now, there should, in theory, be no such thing as fox hunting in Britain anymore. Horses and hounds do ride out still, but only following scents laid down in advance by hunt officials. Trail hunting, it is called. But we've been given distressing videos, pictures which appear to show an illegal fox hunt taking place.
Digging out a fox. Hunters are resorting to spades and a terrier to target their prey. Foxes head underground for cover, but when the hunt is out, it's no protection. First, a hunt member removes the terrier. No! The hounds are at peak levels of excitement. The assembled hunt is expectant too.
Juno! Juno!
They all know what is coming. The sport. A fox is lifted out and presented to the dogs. But there's a bonus for hounds and humans. Another fox bolts out of the hole.
Ah, brace! There's a brace!
Much to the fox hunter's delight. The Avonvale hunt and its members have been instantly suspended by hunting's governing body. Wildlife campaigners have condemned their behaviour.
That's fox hunting, pure and simple, and it's illegal. And I sincerely hope that all of those who are identifiable in this video are brought to justice. This is a case now for the police and for the RSPCA. This insidious, vile habit has to be stamped out once and for all.
Calling. Please wait.
We tried to ask the hunt why they claim to follow an artificially laid scented trail for their hounds. but have now been videoed almost serving up foxes to their dogs. They didn't respond.
The mobile number you've called is currently unavailable.
The concern for those in the wider hunting community is not just what has happened and its association with this hunt, it's the impact beyond it. The suggestion is that so-called trail hunting, in the eyes of any, is a myth, and this video goes some way to proving it. Fox hunters across the country know this is damaging to them. The police have confirmed they will investigate. The hunt has been summoned to a meeting tomorrow to explain themselves. The fate of the foxes, unknown. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Wiltshire.
Shocking pictures indeed. Now finally, it might seem an odd combination, an Oscar-nominated screenwriter who is also a world triathlon champion, but in the career of Leslie Patterson they are closely linked. She used her winnings to fund her passion project, a remake of the anti-war film All Quiet on the Western Front. It has taken her 16 years to get it made, so more of a marathon than a sprint then. Now she is a front-runner at the Oscars.
While many of us strive to be the best in our field, it's probably fair to say that triathlete Leslie Patterson has done that. Twice. This time, it's her writing, not her running, that's got people talking about the 5-time world champion. Her film, All Quiet on the Western Front, a favourite this awards season.
I think when you're so passionate about telling the story and when you really believe in it, I'm the type of personality that stops at nothing to get it done.
It's based on a novel that follows the First World War from a German perspective, but printed word was brought to life on screen by the Scottish writer.
I'd actually read the novel in school in one of my English literature classes, and of course it's a gorgeous masterpiece, and then became aware of it again 16 years ago when we'd seen it in a bookshop. And it's such a beautiful novel and such a potent message. Why don't we inquire into who has the rights?
To make her dream a reality, Leslie often used her athletic earnings to get the movie off the ground.
I've been a professional triathlete for the last 15 years, and to try and raise those funds I used a lot of my race earnings to do that, because often you get lump sums of money and that can go towards an endeavour like this.
2 Jahre voll mit Handgranaten kann ich mir nicht aussehen wie ein Strumpf.
The film's been nominated for a record-equalling 14 BAFTAs. For Leslie, she's learnt lessons from both walks of life.
What's the best reaction you get from people when they find out that you do one and the other?
They're like, wow, you are an overachiever. My sport has taught me incredible resilience, endurance, overcoming the odds, overcoming obstacles. From the artistic standpoint, that creativity has really lended itself to thinking outside the box about how to get things done.
The story's no stranger to the Oscars. A 1930 adaptation won Best Picture. With 9 nominations, it's returning this year, and so is Leslie.
This is actually not your first time going to the Oscars.
It is not. It was probably about 12 or 13 years ago, and I actually waited tables at the Oscars, and I had Judi Dench and Jennifer Lopez on my table. So that's definitely going in my Oscar speech, should I win.
From the Scottish Hills to Hollywood, years of dedication means that rather than serving the stars, Leslie is now sitting alongside them. Rishi Davda, News at 10, Stirling.
Well, what a story. Brilliant film too. Good night. Thanks for watching.